Hey guys, so I am going to show you how to filter some selects with Knockout.js, and I can give you a quick example of what I mean. Um, Basically, if I select this object, I want something to pull in for that. So if I select object 1, it gives me a sorted list. Then if I select object 2, it gives me a different sorted list. And this is all done through an ajax action with json data, and it's being put in through Knockout. Alright, so let's begin. Okay, so I went ahead and deleted everything, so now whenever I reload the page, nothing will work. So as you can see, I can select the object and nothing's being pulled in. So we're going to start completely fresh here. So with that in mind, I'm going to assume that you already have your form that you are in need for the knockout filtering already. So once again, I'm assuming that you already have your first set of objects with your form, and then we'll dive into the knockout here in a bit. So with that in mind, we'll just go ahead and dive into the form. And as you can see here, we've just got my simple form, and right here is where I am adding in my first set of objects, and I am looping over the fields, setting their ID as the value and displaying their name. So one thing that we're going to need to do down here is that we need to include the new knockout file that we're going to be creating. So I'm just going to go ahead and add it in right now. And I'm going to name this knockout select. Perfect. Okay, so now we're going to jump over into the new knockout select file that I'll create, and we'll dive into the knockout. Okay, so now let's go ahead and here's my new file, and I'm going to use CopyScript. There are converters out there, so if you don't exactly understand what I'm typing, I'll have a link down below for a CopyScript converter. But in the meantime, we'll just get started with the view model. Now, for right now, I'm only going to do the field ID. I guess I should have mentioned, I'll do that really quick. So jumping back into the other file, the form, notice that I'm not pulling anything in. I am saying that my components is an empty array. So I'm not pulling anything in. This right here is going to be set via our ajax action with our JSON data. So don't do anything with it, keep it how it is. And okay, we'll jump back into the knockout now. So like I said, I'm only going to set the field ID for now, and then I'll come back and do the component and the components array. Don't forget, at this point it's not going to work because you aren't actually applying any of the bindings or anything like that. So you need to apply the bindings at the very end. Very important part, don't forget it. Okay, so that should get us set. We should be up and running here now. What we need to do now is go back into the form, and at the very end of the form for the first select is where we need to add the data bind. So we need to bind it, and by doing this data bind, and we're going to do its value as the field ID. And now it should be bound. In order to test this though, because I don't actually know if it is or not, but in order to test it, all I'm going to do is add a simple p tag up here and just add the data bind text and do the field ID. What this will do now is whenever I select one, it should pop up a p tag right up in here. So let's go ahead and test this out. And it does. Perfect. That is the ID. And to confirm, we'll go in and inspect the element. We can see right there, object 2, 3251. Perfect. So we're all good to go. So now the next step is that we need to actually have a trigger. Like whenever you select something, your object, you need to have it trigger in action, right? So let's go into the knockout, and I am going to add a computed thing. I'm going to call this self.trigger components. And like I said, this is going to be computed. And for now, all I'm going to do is console log, because I want to make sure that it actually works. So now whenever I go back to my form, I'm going to jump over to the console over here. And whenever I select it, perfect, it's triggering. So when I unselect something, it shouldn't. Perfect, so it's working. So now I guess I'm going to jump back into the knockout, and now I should be able to go ahead and add the components. So I'll add the component ID, and then for this one, I'm going to add components, and I'm going to make this an observable array. I'll get to that here in a minute, but just keep this in mind, okay? I'll link up what that is going to go to later. Okay, we should be good there. So let me go ahead and link up what this is going to be going to. So the components array is going to be your JSON data. Like that's going to be the array of objects, right? So going back into the form, your options for select, basically that's going to be that array, but it's not bound or anything like that, and that you'll have like a whole bunch of stuff added onto the back of this for displaying that. But once again, options for select is going to be the observable array. Okay. So now what we need to do is basically just dive into the ajax call. So here I've already proven that it worked, so I'm going to go ahead and delete that, and let's go ahead and start the ajax. This can be any URL that you want. You're just going to have to define the route later. I've already defined a route, so I'm not going to go into my routes folder, but I named this admin get components for form. Like I said, you can name it whatever you want, doesn't matter. We want the data to be the field ID. Been looking at this too long, field's starting to look funny. And we want the data type to be JSON. Just setting a blank array, and I'm going to prove that this works, so I'm going to console log. Perfect. Okay, so like I said, this route can be whatever you want. You just have to define it in your routes. Make sure you don't forget that. I'm not going to go into my routes, but I can show you what I did in my routes. So in my routes, I went and I said get components for form, and I said that that was to my new objects controller, and the method was components, I think. So that is what I set in my routes. So what we should do now is we need to go into our controller, and here is where we need to set that method. So def, I named it components, and for now we can just leave it blank, but this right here is where we're going to be doing a majority of our stuff. So to test that that route actually worked, first you need to bounce Rails. Great, so perfect. So to test that this actually worked, I'm going to just type in get components for form. Great, I get an error because I don't have a HTML file that's linking to this. So it's saying that there's no template. We don't want a template, don't create a template. Because this is going to be JSON, if you add a .json at the end of it, it's still not going to work because we don't actually have any JSON data coming in through the controller. So let's go ahead and jump back here. If we add a array of stuff, and we go ahead and declare that that is going to be JSON. So in order to do that, you're going to do respond to do I want the format to be JSON and render my things array. Now whenever I go back here, I should get things. Perfect. So I get thing 1, thing 2, which is exactly what we wanted up here. So the route's working, everything's hooked up. We should be good to go. So before we get too far, we should actually go ahead and test that our form, our console log, is actually working. So I'm going to go ahead and refresh my form. And when I select one, it's saying it doesn't know. Undefined is... Let me jump back into my form here, or my knockout. Oh gosh, guys. I forgot ID right there. So, this is why you test every little bit, one step at a time. So, perfect. Let me go ahead and refresh this now. And I do. I get my haha. So, still not pulling anything in yet, but that's fine. Let's go ahead and go back here. And we're going to need to go into the controller again. And in the controller, this is basically where you're going to pull in your data. Normally, I would not do this. How we set things up is we use presenters and then we use Hamsterdam and build our own structures that way. But I'm not going to go through that whole process. That's a totally different blog post. So for now, you can do this in the model, or you can do it right here. All I'm going to do is do this right here. Now I'm not actually going to show you how I'm getting all my data because there's a lot going on. There's loops, and all this flattening. So instead, I already know the data that I want. I'm just going to show you. I'll give a quick example of how you probably could end up getting your data. So it'd be something like this, where you do admin Now here's something to know. You're going to need to do a toString on this because your params field ID is not actually, this is pulling in as a string. So whenever if you were to put this right now, you would see the quotes around it. Just forewarning, it's got me in the butt a couple different times. So you're going to map over that and something like this, and that's going to have map over those, and then you'll finally return your data structure, right? Something along these lines, and you'll probably want like component ID and component name. Something like this is what I presume you would do, okay? But like I said, I already know the data that I want, so I'm just going to hard code it just for this example. Just know this is where you're going to pull in your data, okay? So since I already have this, I'm going to say if going to make an empty array and then just push data into it pretty much. And I do want component ID, and I do want component name. Now, if I need the other object, so And last one. Perfect. So now I should have my data that I want. So I'm going to go ahead and go back, and I'll just open up a new tab for the get. And if I do my .json, right, so I'm not actually doing I'm still returning things, and things doesn't exist anymore. So now I need to do data. And now I should get an empty array because I'm not setting anything in my params. Perfect. So this is golden. We're great. Now what we need to do is we should go back to our form, and we should test to see if we are actually getting the proper URL with params whenever we select an object. To do this, you can either go into your Rails console, and you can see here, I'll go ahead and empty this out for you really quick. Now, when I select one, you'll see that it starts a get for my get components per form, and here are my params right there. Perfect. Another way that you can look at this is if you go to network, you should get this right there. Components, the exact same thing. When you click on it, it's going to tell you what you got. So that's exactly what we want. We're good. So now if I were to go up here, and at the very end over here, if I do my get field 52, that's going to give me the array only specific for that param. Okay? Once again, this is where you're going to do all your filtering and stuff ahead of time, which is going to be where that's going to all happen up here. Okay, that's on your own. I assume you know how to get your own data, so go forth and do good things. So now comes the fun part. Now we need to go into our knockout again, and in our knockout we need to grab, we need to basically fill out the data. So once we have all of our data, we can set up the for component params in data. And here I'm going to do, yeah, that'll work. Now, I haven't done the component model yet, but we'll get there. I know that I'm going to want to populate, and then I want to push that into the array, and I want the components at the very end. I want the very end that array being pushed in to our components, which is our observable array. Okay, so now we need to make our component model, and I'm going to go ahead and add it up here. So Okay, so with this last step finished in Knockout, we should be all set. So let's go ahead and finish up the form, because the form still isn't bound to our to this observable array yet. So let's go ahead and jump into our form, and on the second select is where we're going to do this. Now this is going to get long. We want the value, and we want that to be component ID. This is just going to be the select one. For options, this is where you're getting the list of components and the options text. You want the text to be its component name. And you want the value to be its ID. There. So we should be all set, which is good. Our select one's coming through, but none are coming in yet. So if we select one, boom, there we go. We're getting our list. So that is how you filter using Knockout.js and with a simple ajax action that's requesting some JSON data. Hope you enjoyed it.